good opportunity to explore with both Daisy from the IASS service and or network. Sorry, I always introduced Daisy wrongly, and if she wasn't muted, she'd probably be telling me off right now. And Phil from NHS England, just to talk about what the expectations are around the funding of IASS services now that they are providing advice on education, health and care, and why that might be of interest to health commissioners, especially in relation to the learning disability and autism strand of work. So I'm hoping that by the time that we finish at 12:30, all of that will be absolutely clear to you. We haven't got the time for you to introduce yourself kind of online, as it were, face to face. But if you do want to just put in the chat who you are and what your role is, and then everybody can kind of see who's on the call. Now I've got somebody with their hand up. Julie, did you want to say something? Do come in if you did. Julie's changed her mind. Okay.
Apologies, by mistake.
That's all right. No problem, Julie. And just to say, I'm sure that both Daisy and Phil would be really open to sort of to any, you know, if there's anything that's not clear in their presentations, then do feel free to put your hand up or just stick it in the chat, and we'll either address that as we go along or address it at the end. And we have left quite a good chunk of time at the end for questions and discussions, so hopefully there won't be any sort of queries that you've got that we haven't addressed by the end. I have been very draconian and I've muted you all, but yeah, obviously if you do want to make a contribution, then do feel free to unmute yourself. But since there is quite a few of us, we've now got 65, if you can just sort of, you know, either put it in the chat or stick your hand up, and then we can make sure that that I can try and curate that so that it's seamless. So anything else I should have mentioned, Marie?
No, I think that's everything.
Okay, super. And we will send you details of where the recording is on the website once we've put it up, so that if you want to share it with colleagues who you think it might be helpful, have a chance to see it, then they'll be able to view it as well. So I'm going to stop wittering now, and I am going to hand over to Daisy. Daisy, are you going to try and share your screen, or would you like Marie to?
No, I'm going to take this opportunity as a learning moment for me and try and share my screen. So let's just see how that works. A bit badly so far, obviously, but that's not. Oh, has that worked?
Yes.
Well, okay, right. I've just changed some slides around just willy-nilly just to make things harder. There we go. Okay. Right. So my name's Daisy Russell. Currently, I work on the Information Advice and Support Programme, and my job for the past very many years has been supporting First Parent Partnership Services and now Information Advice and Support Services across the country. I'm going to do quite a whistle-stop joint and cross-commissioning SEND IAS presentation. Some of you will, I think, know me, may have seen this before. Feel free to make some tea. This is just going to look at why joint commission and cross commission and how this is being done at the moment. We do have some time for questions. I will try and look at the chat, but I don't want to lose the screen altogether, which, you know, might happen. So there is some time, and believe, at the end, and I'm more than happy to have conversations with people separately at another time about their particular circumstance. Okay, if you hear any noise from my end, that could either be a cat, a husband, or the constant text messages from the school regarding COVID, as I'm sure some of the rest of you are getting as well. Okay, so the why. So I'm going to start with the why of Information Advice and Support Services, and we're not, you know, what we're going to look at is the Children and Families Act. So this is primary legislation. And some of you who work, particularly for CCGs, will be clear when we have lots of questions about who the responsibility of having an information advice and support service is. And I am not here to demand loads of money from you all, okay, although that would be excellent. But I am here to be really clear about what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. So the law, the Children and Families Act, Section 32, requires children, young people and parents to be provided with advice and information about matters relating to the special educational needs and disability. So it's an absolute, it must be done. And you'll note that it's not just for parents, it's for young people and it's also for children. So children have a separate right to this service and they have a right to that to be confidential. And that throws up a lot of stuff for us, but it is an absolute right in law. What does this look like? Well, the code of practice, the SEND code of practice, then gives you the details of what this looks like. So that's where you get it called a SENDIAS. It's not the easiest thing to call it, but it does what it says on the tin. And it talks about how it has to be a dedicated and easily identifiable service. It says that matters relating to, which is what the law calls it, are education, health and social care. So the service must give information, advice and support on education, health and social care. That must be independently given to young people and to children. It must be impartial, confidential, arm's length, free and accessible, and based on the law. So all of the advice and support and information the service gives must be based on the law. It cannot be, this is what this local area does, so this is what you can expect. Okay, so there's the service, giving information, advice and support about health and social care. Why would you jointly commission it? Well, primarily, firstly, you jointly commission it because the law requires you to. So Section 26 of the Children and Families Act, you'll all know very well, talks about joint commissioning arrangements. And these are about the arrangements that must be made about the education, health and care provision to be secured for children and young people of whom the local authority is responsible for, who have a disability or a special educational need. And it goes on to detail 26.3, joint commissioning arrangements must include arrangements for considering and agreeing what advice and information is to be provided about education, health and care provision, by whom, to whom and how such advice and information is to be provided. And actually we know by whom, to whom and how, because the code sets out and the law sets out information, advice and support service to parents, children and young people. Okay, so this is where we get these are services that must be jointly commissioned. Now, for those of you who haven't got a jointly commissioned service, obviously don't panic, because obviously this is the law from 2014, but it would be wrong to suggest that this has happened everywhere across the country or that it has happened particularly quickly. But it has sped up considerably over the past year or two, which is going to kill me. And we'll talk about that a bit in a bit. But this isn't something, this is actually something for lots of local areas that is obviously quite a new thing. And we're going to talk about now why I think more people should be doing it. But this is not a telling off or I can't believe you haven't done this or you have to do this. Okay, right. So why else other than it being the actual law? Well, one, the duties on local areas for the provision of an information, advice and support service are significant. Right, so it went from being a service that was just for parents and just on education to being parents, children and young people on education, health and social care. Right, so we need to make sure there is access to this level of support and information and advice. And there is no way of doing this unless it is jointly and cross-commissioned. Okay, what's in it for you? This is, I've put what's in it for health and social care, but this presentation is very much health centred, but some of the kind of general things that are in it for people. So support for parents, children, young people to understand and navigate the health system. So going to the right people at the right time. we have huge amounts of issues in the system where people just do not know where to go. They spend a lot of time at the wrong places asking for the wrong things, completely understandably, because they have no idea how the system works. And actually, the system works a lot better when people use it better. These services have a high level of legal training. They all have IPSI legal training, and they can offer that knowledge and guidance on the law and on local policy to health professionals. You know, SEND law is complex. Generally, quite a lot of law is complex. These are people who know about the law, and they use this as well to look at the risk of litigation in tribunals and minimising that. They do that by effective partnership between users and professionals, but also by a very clear explanation of the law. So for some health professionals who are going to tribunal for the first time, an explanation of what that's going to be like. They could also talk to people about what is expected in a plan or an assessment, and when or where and how to avoid tribunals and litigation. Where that is impossible, and it is not always possible to avoid tribunals. These are services to support parents, young people and sometimes children through tribunals, which actually makes them a lot easier for everyone involved. You know, having a service that making sure things run properly, making sure you are dealing with the actual issues on the table, that is not costing parents and young people lots and lots of money, and will be doing so and supporting that parent or that young person in a partnership-based way is a much better way to be doing tribunals. Okay, so they're a service that can empower children and young people and their parents to raise issues and concerns in a constructive manner. Which touched on this, early resolution of disagreements, better complaints. I mean, no one's never going to have any complaints. It's just not how the world works. But actually a good complaint, a complaint that is very clearly written, that is a complaint about something that should be complained about, is a good thing, should be seen as a good thing. And people being supported to do that is a good thing. There's some stuff around using services to maximise the effective views and wishes of children, young people and their families. Meaningful consultation. What do people think? How is it working for them? What questions do you want to ask, and how can the service support you in doing that? So, some stuff around data. Geographical and demographic mapping data. What is happening, where and why? So is there a bit of the local area that actually we've had a huge rise in children being ASD diagnosis? What's happening there? What's happening over here? So we've touched on it later on. So we've just been talking to a local authority in the Northwest, and so their service came to them and said actually they noticed immediately a huge issue with the incontinence pads and nappies among the local authorities. Just weren't happening, they were happening consistently, and there weren't enough. And as a result of that, they have then changed that contract with that supplier. So it was immediately noticed and it has been dealt with. Data on the nature of health inquiries. So most services should be able to give you, we had say 30% whose primary reason for coming to the service was on health. There'll be lots others whose primary reason coming to the service will be, say, an exclusion. But from an exclusion, obviously, comes all kinds of other things. So from exclusion, then you might be talking to CAMS. Then you might be talking to, about education, health and care assessment. And then you might have all kinds of different health issues that have come in, even though the first thing the family have come to you for is that their child has been excluded. So it's important that services are able to collect all that data, not only the primary reason they've come, but actually all the reasons that come out after the primary reason. So other data that services gather and can give to local CCGs, services that feature heavily, that are always commented on. Feedback from children and young people and their parents on the quality of those services, the ease of access, use of eligibility criteria. Classically we have the CAM service won't see my child because they have ASD diagnosis. So where is that happening? Why is that happening? What could be done well? What is being done well? What could be done better? And I won't go into this a lot because we'll be talking about it a bit later, but also increasingly feeding into that dynamic risk register. These are services that know families in quite a unique way. They don't know services because families because they have to go to them. Parents, children, young people go to them because they need and want their support. And they sometimes are the same families that services will see over a number of years, and they will watch that child grow up, and they will watch things go right, and they will watch things go wrong. You know, and the first sign of, you know, a child either being excluded from school or not attending school, being off-rolled, families finding it increasingly difficult to cope, noticing changes in behaviour. All of these things are things that services will know about. You know, and those early warning signs are incredibly important. So I think I won't go on it anymore, but just to kind of make sure that's noted. Okay, and the other reason you might want to, rather classic one, is always Ofsted. So because it's a legal requirement, Ofsted do look at this. Oh my Lord, I've managed to change something. Sorry, I'm just trying to understand why my screen's gone mad. Okay, Ofsted. Doesn't want me to tell you about Ofsted. So a report from Ofsted which came out in June 2020. This is their comment on the Information Advice and Support Service. The service is under considerable pressure and is not fulfilling its core functions, including its work with the children and young people themselves. The service is not yet jointly commissioned and is only managing the current workload through additional short-term funding. So joint commissioning is something that Ofsted not only pick up on, but they comment on it, and it sometimes is part of a written statement of action. For this local area, I think pretty much immediately after this happened, about 2 months after Ofsted had been, the service is now jointly commissioned. It's Norfolk, just in case anyone's interested. I haven't written it on the slide because that seemed a bit mean, but then I tell everyone, so I don't really see what the difference is. But if people do want to go and look at the report, that's where it is. Okay, and the kind of things. So this is from Dudley. These are the things in their SLA that they give Information Advice and Support Service on regarding health. So I'm not going to read all through them all. You can see them and you can have these slides, but they are, as you would expect, physiotherapy, OT, CAMS, personal care, speech and language, wheelchair and continence supplies, and very highly specialist services commissioned by NHS England. So quite often alternative communication systems. So that's the range of health stuff that they are working with families on and giving advice on. And of course there is the, you know, assessment and plans and all the rest of it. Okay. Right, now my other bit is this, which is commissioning across local areas. So we've talked a lot about joint commissioning, but we are increasingly seeing and trying to support collaboration across local area boundaries. And this has worked quite well and hopefully will continue to in line with CCG reorganisations. So we have some providers of information advice and support service that already offer the service across 2 or more local authorities as part of joint arrangements. And obviously this offers economies of scale, improves service range or viability, and this is what has to happen when services may otherwise be very small. If you are a Rutland, if you are a Darlington, the local authority could be paying 3 times the national average per head for your service, and it still is not going to meet the statutory responsibility. Okay, so you need to join up, and for a CCG, actually, if you have 3 local authorities, say, then actually commissioning something that goes across those local authorities makes much more sense. Okay, and without further ado, we'll look at what people are doing. So about 2 years ago to 3 years ago, we had one service, Bath and North East Somerset, that had a joint commissioned service. And now about a third of our services are, and 20% are actively working on this. Some of that work has slowed down due to COVID. Actually, some of it has still gone ahead and even sped up because people have found it easier to have meetings. So that swings and roundabouts. Most services, the vast majority, are jointly commissioned with a service level agreement. We have some that are kind of the bottom of included on the section 75, but the vast majority it's service level agreement. And we have examples of service level agreements based on our minimum standards. We have a set of minimum standards for the provision of information advice and support services. Minimum standard number 1 is at the jointly commissioned. And you can have those SLAs. So what we would really encourage people to do is don't reinvent the wheel. This does not have to be any harder than it already is. And it's quite an easy win because we are talking a relatively small amount of money. These services are famously and unfortunately remain very poorly funded. The DfE have given a significant amount of money to us for the Information Advice and Support Programme over the past 3 years to support services in meeting the minimum standards, including the joint commissioning one, as an acknowledgement that they are very poorly funded and their remit is now huge. But we are still talking a small amount of money for a big impact, and it's an excellent look, frankly, and it's quite a good place to start. If you haven't done lots of joint commissioning, actually joint commissioning something where you can have an SLA, it's set out exactly what it's supposed to be doing, is quite an easy one. The national picture is this. So last year we had 4 joint funded with health, this year at 15. Joint funded with social care only, last year was 0 and this year is 10. And joint funded with both health and social care, last year was 7, this year was 25. So we have seen a significant increase. Obviously, this is not, it's not everywhere, but it is going in the right direction. Okay, what to do? So when we're working with people individually about, and this is often with services, write a business case. So we encourage services to write a business case, often with the support of the CCG and the local authority, and whoever else. Write a business case. Make sure you have data in it. What are you already doing, percentage of casework, etc. What more could be done if you had the money and what would you need to do it? Flexibility with timing and budgets, and a little bit here about resource in different ways. Okay, so the plan is obviously, and the aim is to be included in long-term budget planning from CCG and from social care. That is, I'm not going to pretend that is absolutely the long-term aim, but, no one is pretending that they don't know how difficult things are at the moment and that budgets are already set. So where there have been instances where either there hasn't been able to be a lot of resource in terms of hard cash, or there hasn't any at the moment, or not very much, we've looked at, alongside CCGs and local authorities and the service, alternative resource commitments. So one of this has been redeployment of current resource, including staff. So some CCGs and social care have been able to identify staff that actually are doing similar types of jobs and may well be able to be redeployed within the information advice and support service. So you're not losing that member of staff, they're still doing what they, you want them to be doing, and you haven't had to add any more resource. We've had some cases where office space has been provided for the service. Lots of examples of training being provided. We have a service where they're considering, or a couple actually, where the CCG or working in health have offered line management to the manager of the service. Quite a lot of examples of joint working with DCOs and DMOs, feeding into strategic boards, but also discussing together what's happening, what needs to happen, and working together. And we have had some suggestion of DCOs being based within the Information Advice and Support Service. And then other people, other CCGs have said that we're not going to commit to a significant amount of money at the moment, but we will give you some money in the short term, some targeted funding for a particular activity, maybe usefully some data collection so we can build up our case for inclusion in budget planning in the future. So that is already happening. Now, the ones I mentioned, the ones that aren't jointly commissioned, those have all come with funding. So at the moment, that is however many numbers it was, and that is funding, and that varies hugely. So the lowest, I think, is about 6%, and the highest is 50%. So we have some services that are joint funded between the CCG and the local authority, and we have others, one, if I'm honest, that has has funded equally between health, social care, and education. And I can give you more examples of those. I'm going to come out of this and have a look at the questions. I wasn't able to look at the chat.
You've got a question about the average spend per head, Daisy.
Okay, so I've got I can find you the data report. The average spend per head for information advice and support service is just over £1. Let me have a look at the comments. So it's just over £1. It has gone up a tiny bit recently, just over £1. But we have a huge variation. We've tried to minimise that, but it's just really tricky. So we have some that are, 38p a head, and we have some that are £2 a head, £3 a head. Unfortunately, a couple, as I said earlier, of our very small local authorities who actually per head fund their service well, but only there can get one member of staff. So that's not particularly helpful, which is why we talk about cross-commissioning, others that fund their services well. And we have lots of conversations when I'm working with CCGs and local authorities on an individual basis about actually, if the CCG is going to commit to some funding, it wants to make sure that the local authority are also funding their service to a reasonable level. And that is an absolutely reasonable question and something you should be asking for. But I can share the data report with everyone. We've just had a data report which gives you the funding for every service in the country and breaks it down per head and lets you know who is contributing to that.
You've also got a few questions about service level agreements. So somebody saying that they're struggling to jointly commission because the local authorities can't agree what it would look like. And people asking whether you've got a service level agreement you can circulate.
Yes, I've got a good couple of service level agreements that I can circulate, and they are taken from ones that are already being used. So they're not ones we've made up. They're ones that we have just anonymised quite lazily, and you can just put your own details in. And we can absolutely circulate those. And if the local authority is struggling, then I'm more than happy to meet with the local authority on that.
And you've got a question around data. Are the services supported around their data because we struggle to get data, which in turn makes it difficult to support joint commissioning?
Yes. So one of the struggle services have is their database has to be completely standalone because it has to be completely confidential. And those services who don't have very much money for a database struggle. Those services who are stuck on a certain type of database struggle. As I said, we've had some CCGs who have contributed some funding to support the gathering of more data, and that could be getting a better database, or it could just be some staff time, frankly. We are in negotiations at the moment. I'm really keen to have a national database, which would enable us to make sure that all services can gather all of this data, but that's not about to happen this week, month, possibly year. I'm just having a look as well. Do I have an example of redeployment of resource for a CCG? I have examples of people thinking about it, but not of one where it's actually happened. So I am hopeful that this will happen. But as with all of this, it's a lot more complex than me just telling people blithely, this is what people are doing, because people have to look at people's job descriptions, and these are human beings who have to change their job. So I will ask the people who I know are looking at it and see where we are with that. Oh, who do you anticipate writing the business case? Well, generally it's been the Information Advice and Support Service who have written the business case, but then often CCGs have also, depending on where people are, people in CCGs have written a business case, or people above them, various different business cases it appears. And as is always the case, everyone seems to do this slightly differently. I would love to be able to tell you this is just how it's done, but of course, as you'll know, everyone does it differently. So there are joint commissioning boards who would require quite a long business case. There are others who just, someone's come and give a presentation for 10 minutes and that's fine, and lots of stuff in between. But I have some examples of a business case, which we are anonymising, so we will share that as well. Again, don't want people reinventing the wheel if there's stuff already out there. Okay.
I think that was all the questions that you had in the chat. Anybody got any additional ones for Daisy? Want to put your hand up? Oh, we've got a hand.
Oh,
Oh, exciting. I now have to switch screens so that I can see whose hand it is. I think it's Laura. Oh, we've got
Hiya,
Joy.
yeah,
Yeah, Laura first.
Oh, sorry, I don't think I was first, actually. If someone else wanted to jump in, I was just going to say, should I wait my turn or should I just go for it?
Go you're there now, Laura. We have got time.
Yeah, no, I was really interested to hear about the areas that you were talking about that have gone across different local areas, particularly around the CCG mergers and the sort of integrated care systems. I'm guessing where they're kind of getting the bigger CCGs. I'd just be interested to hear a bit more about how that's worked. So, and whether you've got an idea, a sense of how small an area would need to be to work in that way. So I'm work across South West London, Croydon Place as one of those. We're all 5 areas within our CCG, previously 5 CCGs, 5 or 6 CCGs, have very different landscapes in terms of the providers who deliver health and social care services. So, I mean, it'd be great if we could have one SENDIAS, but I was just wondering if you've experienced anything like that, whether there's kind of a scaling system in terms of how small that works across number of CCGs. I don't know, just some sort of expansion on that work and how far that can go, or whether it's too early days, I suppose.
Okay, yes, and very quickly it is too early days, but we are exploring and have been exploring lots of different things. So, one of the difficult things is I can't say this is how it's done. One of the brilliant things is it can be done in any way. So with some, we've been talking about the CCG employing or giving resource for a member of staff who might focus on health, who would work across the 3 local services. So that's quite a straightforward way of doing it, and that doesn't mean making all the services one service, but it does mean that they have some additional resource for health. Others have been thinking about sharing a CYP worker across services and health having a contribution to that. There have been some bigger discussions about actually the service becoming one service, with one manager, but actually having people in each local area, because you do need to have that, has to have a local presence, but actually there being one manager, and in one kind of CCG area that was thought it might be an idea for that the person who line managed that manager to be the CCG. So there are issues, and I know in Southwest we've been having some conversations with Sutton, and of course there are issues because we 3 local areas, 2 services might be outsourced, 3 are in-house. How do you make that one? And so that it is not straightforward, and I'm not saying it is, but I think it is the way forward. So my interest is that people are able to think about all kinds of different ways of doing it, and that they're having those discussions, and then it might start with a member of staff shared across, but it might develop from there. It is, I'm going to be honest, eye-bleedingly slow going in the main. So I mean, I think we've done really well to get where we are, but these are systems and people and change, and then there's COVID, and then there's all the other stuff going on. So this is not stuff that is happening at the speed of light, but it is stuff that is happening. And our interest is just that people know about it, that they're having the conversations, and that they're thinking about it. I'm not expecting, I would love it, everything to be transformed, but we want, and I think we need this to work, because I think this is the future, not just for information advice and support service, but for quite a lot of services. Particularly, for small local authorities. So I'm just really interested in pushing it. And if people have different ideas, please let me have them, or invite me to a meeting, and we can kind of talk through them all. And if you have any big stumbling blocks, let me know, because I think we're all just really keen to push it forward as much as we can. And that might just be at the beginning, yes, we're going to have a conversation about it, but long term we are going to have some bigger plans.
Okay, Joy has been waiting very patiently.
Oh, sorry, Joy.
Thank you. I'm a whole CCG commissioner. Generally, when we do commissioning, we would specify what we need and select a provider through a process of some description. Is this different? Is it sort of your SENDIAS provider is your SENDIAS provider, or can you do a procurement through some kind of competitive process if you chose to?
Absolutely. So in Hull, yours is an outsourced provider. So yours currently is with kids. So for some, about 30% of our services are outsourced. So they have been commissioned on, and they've been procured on a tender. Now, what we're saying to people who have an outsourced service, this is, the next time you go for a tender, you need to make sure it's a jointly commissioned one.
Yeah.
There have been some actually that have brought it back in house by doing that as well. So it's not just one way, but absolutely, this is an opportunity, I would say, for a local area. God knows I love the information advice and support services, and they are much, much better than they were. But some of them still might not be being brilliant. Yeah. And it might be that you might kind of think this is actually a really good opportunity to relook at what we're providing and to jointly commission a service and not start again necessarily, but you know what I mean.
Refresh, yeah. Yes. I suppose that if I can just take a second just to follow up then, because I asked the question about who was writing the business case. Well, I suppose that sort of flipped from a committee, because I would say it was for us, if we're doing joint commission, it was for us to specify our needs rather than the SENDIAS provider necessarily telling us what they want. If we're doing it, purely commissioning based on data and evidence, I would certainly for my area, I'd be promoting a needs-driven approach rather than a provider-led. We'd like this. I'm not saying they wouldn't be part of it, but not, wouldn't. I probably wouldn't advocate an approach where the SENDIAS provider was leading that process of business case and funding.
For most outsourced services, that would be the case. You're right. For most in-house, it has been that the initial drive for this has come from the service.
Right. Okay.
So they have written and said, this is what it needs to be, and they've been asked to do that.
Yeah.
Business cases we have are their examples, but absolutely in your position, and that would depend on your relationships, but in your position, you'd be working with local authority saying, this is what we're going to jointly commission. These are the minimum standards. This is what it has to do. We've got an SLA that I can send you for an outsourced service. That is jointly commissioned between health, social care and education. So I can send you that. But yes, you would want to be doing some level of needs analysis. What do we need? What does this look like? And then that's your business case completely. Yeah. I'm just going to go because I've seen this one, which is one of my favourites, and I said that outsourcing was the best way to ensure independence. Is there a view? So the service is not independent, it's impartial. If it was independent, it wouldn't be funded by the local authority of the CCG, because that's how independence is generally understood in this world. So we have some very, very, they all have to be arm's length. We have some very, very strong in-house services, and we have some very strong outsourced services. And we also have the opposite of that. Generally, a quality service is meeting the minimum standards, has a good relationship with its local authority and its CCG. There is no difference, frankly, that I've ever seen in my very many years around whether in-house or outsourced, apart from sometimes access to strategic work. But no, we wouldn't say they have to be outsourced.
Okay, thank you.
Daisy, I'm going to pause you there.
Yes, do pause me.
Got time.
Just go on.
Give you a little rest, and bring Phil on. And Marie is going to share Phil's presentation. And Phil, would you like to unmute and camera up and introduce yourself? And then we've got time for questions for both. More questions for Daisy if there are, and questions for Phil after Phil's presentation.
Excellent.
Phil, there he is. I thought I'd lost him.
No, I'm very much here. Really interesting that. Thank you, Daisy. I made lots of notes in no particular order. Some of the points I may well pick up through the presentation. So I'm Phil Brayshaw. I work for the National Learning Disability and Autism Programme at NHS England, NHS Improvement, where I lead on admission avoidance and commissioning. I'm going to whiz through the slides fairly quickly. I think I've pitched them about right. You might need to do some work in terms of thinking about how this applies to you in the conversation that we've had. But I think things should fit fairly well. Okay, can we start to move through, please, Marie? Okay, so I was just going to start with a little bit of context. So thinking about the long-term plan. The long-term plan restates our commitment to reducing avoidable admissions to Tier 4 hospitals. So very much continuing the aims of transforming care, we're thinking about how to make sure that people receive the right support and treatment at home, and only go into hospital when that's the right thing to do and everything else has been explored. And so it's in that context that I'm going to think about the SENDIAS service and how it might link into that. Alongside that, there are further commitments around increasing investment in intensive crisis and forensic support and thinking about how we improve quality of care. But as I say, it's the reducing avoidable admissions that I'm going to focus on today. Okay, Marie. Also, it's important to reference the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people with learning disabilities, autism, or both, and their families, and acknowledge that there has been a cumulative impact across education, health, and social care in terms of the services that people have been able to access them and the way that they've been able to access them. And what we know from children, young people, and their families is that they've found this period extremely challenging, and that has in turn had an impact on children's mental health. If we can move on again, please. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is as children and young people go back to school, we want to guard against the potential increase in admissions of children and young people with learning disabilities, autism, or both into specialist hospitals or into residential education or other out of area placements where that wouldn't be appropriate for that child. So thinking about the increased pressure that children and young people have been under, thinking about routes to referral reopening, we are mindful that there may be an increase in admissions to hospital. And so again, that's part of the context. If we can move on again, please. So in terms of our response, we're looking to ensure that commissioners and providers of NHS services increase their vigilance around children and young people with learning disability, autism, or both. And so we're speaking at events like today's, but also putting out through formal notification that children, young people, and their families are struggling, have found the period difficult. And that we need to be very mindful of that, both as commissioners and providers. That we put some guidance out around making sure that key staff are not redeployed outside of NHS services where they play a key role in terms of supporting children and young people with learning disability, autism, or both. And that we're asking local areas through CCG commissioners to strengthen dynamic support processes and dynamic support registers. And that's something that I've highlighted here because I think that's a key role that SENDIAS services can support. I think another area where SENDIAS services could support is in terms of emphasising the need for community care education and treatment review. So we're looking at increasing compliance of community CETRs. And again, thinking about what Daisy was saying around SENDIAS services working with families who are struggling to access services, working with families who are maybe not known, but who are struggling. These are the types of families that and children and young people that can present in terms of requiring an hospital admission without necessarily being in view of services. Can move on again, please. So dynamic support systems and registers. So this is the slide that I wanted to draw people's attention to. So In terms of thinking about joint commissioning of SENDIAS services, one of the things that we are told by local areas is that often children and young people present for admission to hospital without being known to local services, particularly children with autism without learning disability. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So, again, just to kind of think about that in context. A dynamic support register is a way to understand your local population of children and young people. So it's a way of identifying and thinking about those children and young people with learning disability and autism who are at risk of admission, or who are likely to become at risk of admission to hospital. And again, we can think about that as a risk of other out of area placement, a risk of inappropriate residential education, where that's not necessarily in the child's best interest, or contact with health and justice services. So we're thinking about what we're saying to CCGs is that the three things that your dynamic support register needs to do is include children and people with learning disability, autism, or both, who are at risk of admission. Include those who might become at risk of admission due to them struggling or their families struggling, and ensure that those children receive a community care, education and treatment review before any admission. And those are the areas that we think SENDIAS services could really support. So again, moving on to the next slide. Marie, can we move on to the next slide? Is it my screen that's not moving on?
Phil,
Sorry.
it is your screen.
Yeah, I have moved it on.
Oh, okay. Let me think what the next slide might talk about. Is this
Do you want me to tell you what it says? It says.
I think I may have moved on now. So is this talking about the types of children that might be at risk of admission? Is this the next slide?
It is. It says 80% are autistic without learning disabilities.
Okay, so this is children who are currently inpatient in specialist hospital services. Sorry, I'm having all sorts of IT problems up my head with frozen screens and pixelated screens and all sorts of things. There are 220 children and young people under 18 with learning disability, autism or both, who are currently in specialist tier 4 hospital. 80% of those are children with autism without learning disabilities. So that's a key group that we're thinking about. And the relevance of that is that those are children who are not typically known to learning disability services and aren't always known to children and young people's mental health services. So some of these children are known to services, but still not identified within dynamic support registers. And some of these children are not known. And I've said on the slide that there's a perception that some of these children are not known. Often they're not known to individual services, but they are known to systems. And quite often they're children who have not met either eligibility criteria or the threshold for services. So they're the children that have bounced between children and young people's mental health services, learning disability services, social care, maybe not quite meeting the gateway for any of those services, but certainly needing a response from them. And so when we've done deep dives looking at admissions of children and young people who have gone into hospital who have not been known through dynamic support registers, there's a commonality to the experiences of those children and young people. Firstly, and key, is that those children and young people are often struggling to remain at school. So they're formally excluded, they're refusing school, or they're educated at home through some type of choice. That there's quite often a risk of family breakdown. Again, without wanting to paint a particular picture of families, children who are not known on dynamic support registers quite often have families who maybe there are elements of parental mental health issues, drug and alcohol misuse, those types of things. And quite often the children escalate into crisis quite quickly. And so again, from a health perspective, we're asking CCGs to hold registers for those children at risk of admission. But quite often these children and young people are not known to traditional health services. And so we think that the response to that needs to come from those services such as SENDIAS and voluntary sector partners such as parent carer forums, who are able to identify those children who are struggling that are perhaps not known to health services, to help us think about how we can consolidate those at risk of admission registers. Okay, and if we can move on again, please. And as I was saying, a key part of identifying those children is then to make sure that we can offer a community CTR. So again, when we think around the types of children, young people and families who are using SENDIAS services, it may be that those services are in a position where they know those families well and could refer directly into requesting a community CTR prior to any likely admission. And so there's something about we're not going to be able to be in a position to offer community CTRs prior to every admission unless we identify those children, and quite often those children are known locally but not known to the types of services that we've traditionally asked. So I think that's in summary of what I'm saying. And if we could move on again, please. So in terms of thinking around joint commissioning, and again, these questions could be questions that you ask your local SENDIAS services. They could be questions that you think about yourselves. And so what we're trying to encourage is a conversation around, is this service able to identify children and young people at risk of admission? Could they be commissioned to better identify those children? Is the service in a position to request a community CTR? So are they well cited? Are they well informed around community care education treatment reviews and other tools that they might use to support avoidance of admission to hospital? Are these things known about, locally described in the local offer? How else might a SENDIAS service be able to support admission avoidance? So thinking more widely than dynamic support registers and care education treatment reviews. How might this agenda support your services? So when I wrote that, I was thinking about the cumulative impact of COVID, the idea that there's been an impact on children through education, health and care. How can we think about a cumulative response, and how can joint commissioning services like this help to join up that response, not just in COVID times, but as things return to a more stable footing? What other links could be made between SENDIAS services and existing health commissioned and joint commissioned services? And then the last bit is, how might additional funding help? So again, thinking about this in terms of the long-term plan, thinking about the importance of having good data around those children and young people at risk of admission, thinking about increasing compliance to CTRs. If there were money made available to invest in SENDIAS services. And so Daisy talked about some SENDIAS services looking at short-term funding and short-term projects. Is this an area that SENDIAS services in your areas could support in terms of reducing unnecessary admissions to hospital and other out-of-area placements? And I think that is all I'd say. Apologies that apologies for the technical difficulties and the kind of impact that had on the presentation, and hopefully I managed to get the main points across in a way that could be understood, with maybe a little bit of work from your side.
That was absolutely fine, Phil. And I think 6 months into COVID, people are used to technical glitches during presentations. I'm just going to have a quick first question, which was just to double check with you that you're fine, that the slides go out, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm fine for people to come directly to me as well with any kind of ideas or things that they do want to test out around how joint commissioning SENDIAS services might impact on admission avoidance particularly.
Okay, super. Diana, you've got your hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you for that presentation, Phil. That was really useful. I'm from Wiltshire, and our current SENDIAS service is an outsourced service that is not jointly commissioned. I struggled a little bit to make the correlation between the cohort of young people that you were talking about. Obviously, that was really specific to one of your priorities, mainly because it's quite specific high needs cohort of children, young people. And whilst certainly it has been something that we looked at getting a bit more evidence around through case studies in our service, when you're talking about the types of queries that come through the service presenting with health elements, it's kind of the other way around. Those will come through quite early on, so they wouldn't be escalated quite at that point. So that input is happening, but it's really hard to link it with such a specific area that you're talking about. So for me, actually, I was hoping to hear a little bit more about how do we evidence those ones, because those are where the really high numbers are. Sorry if it's not making a lot of sense.
I don't think I'm clear about your question, Diana. Are you clear, Phil?
I think I may be. So
well, you go for it then.
So I think this is. So I'm talking about those children who are in crisis at that point, and those might not be the children that you're coming into contact with through this type of service. I guess what I would say is the dynamic. You're right. I mean that I'm very mindful of admission avoidance. That's my job. But also in terms of providing the type of support earlier on. So dynamic support registers and dynamic support processes, as a minimum, need to identify those children at risk of admission. But actually, what they should do is identify those same children much earlier on. So we know the types of children who are going to go on and really struggle in terms of their mental health or in terms of behaviour. We know the types of children who are likely to end up placed out of area. And so as a number of reports kind of suggest, we know these children are. How do we identify them earlier? How do we make sure that they're known across services earlier? How do we make sure that commissioners are aware of those children earlier? And part of that is through that dynamic support process. So it may be that you're not seeing children and young people at a point of crisis, but what you will be seeing is children and young people who are the same children and young people who maybe in a year or 2 years' time will present at that point of crisis. And so there's something about how can we flag those children who aren't able to access the type of support early enough that we know will prevent that crisis. And that's a real challenge, and not something I have the answer to, but I do have an idea that that's around joint commissioning, that's around people sharing their experience of children and people and families when they are struggling or struggling to access the support and services that broadly support the majority of children.
Thanks, Phil. And I think Daisy might be coming in with a supplementary response.
Hello, yes, just very quickly. I've been having conversations with services and with CCGs about this, particularly over the past couple of months. And I think, you know, in fairness, while we would never expect services to know loads of cases like this, the vast majority say, when you talk to them about it, oh yes, yeah, now I have, yeah, yes, that would have been, yes, that would have been. Now, Wiltshire has a very tiny service, which obviously is something that needs to be addressed, but generally most services would say, yes, most of their work is about that early stage, and we're really pushing. Most services work on early stage, on early identification, on things not escalating. Of course we are, and that would be, the main point of any joint commissioning is obviously we don't get there. But we also have to be really clear, we do get there. And we need to make sure all services know what to do when we're getting there. They know how to feed that in. They know where to go with those families. And actually, I think when services think about it, they kind of then go, oh, yes, so there's that. So I think this is about training, this is about support, this is about data. And obviously, as you said, this is about both ends. Most of our work isn't at the high end, right? It just isn't, and that's good. You know, we don't want it to be, but the work that is, we need to make really, really, really sure is well supported, well informed, and is having an impact. So that's what this is about.
And I suppose, you know, the reason that I wanted us to put this seminar on was so that we could, you know, just sort of be aware that, you know, obviously SENDIAS is not the panacea to avoiding admissions, but it is a part of the jigsaw. And especially if you think about those children, you know, your typical trajectory for an autism only child ending up in tier 4 is 2 years out of school, and you know, and then admission. Phil will correct me if that's changed, but that is quite a typical trajectory, up to 2 years out of school, and then finally crisis and admission. Now, I can't believe, and Daisy will correct me if I'm wrong here, that those parents, or the vast majority of those parents, wouldn't have at some stage been to their SENDIAS service asking for help about that situation. They're both nodding.
Yeah, I'm not correcting you at all.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think we've talked before around one of the things that we're really pushing for with the DHSE and DFE is to look at school exclusion, and school attendance as a wider issue as a shared outcome across government in terms of making reducing school exclusion an outcome for health, education and social care, because it's so key to children's needs being met, and that quite often issues at school later present as issues in health. There's some really good work done by Essex around looking at where people presented where children and people presented at different times. And you typically see an increased spending in education, then an increased spending in health, and then an increased spending in social care as people go through different parts of the services. And I talk about increased spending because that's important. But what it also suggests is that children, young people and their families are struggling accessing those services at different times as well. So there really is something around what it feels intuitively the right thing to do, where there's an opportunity like this to think about jointly commissioning a service that was traditionally education focused, but now much more around that health, education and social care focus. It feels intuitively the right thing to do, and it makes sense, doesn't it, in terms of increasing the exposure of the different services, different organisations to those children, young people and families at different points of their journey, and saying, actually, this looks like an education issue, but it's a children's need issue, and how do we work together to respond to that? This looks like a health issue, but actually we're talking about children, young people moving out of area into special hospitals. That's an issue for all of us. Impacts on social care, impacts on education, impacts on health, but most of all impacts on that child and family in a way that we would all want to respond to.
Thank you, Phil. Now we've got quite a few questions in the chat. So Louise is asking, what community mental health support for children, young people who also have autism and or learning difficulties to avoid crisis occurring and admission? So what in terms of that sort of commissioning piece, Phil, making sure that those community services are there, what's happening, what are NHS England doing? You're on mute while you think.
I am on mute. Trying to unmute myself. Apologies, Amanda. I was reading questions and I wasn't listening to the question that you were directly asking me.
Louise is asking, what community mental health support is there for children, young people who have autism and learning disabilities and or learning disabilities?
Okay, so we're working with children and people's mental health programs at a national basis to make sure that everything that they offer is reasonably adjusted and accessible to children and young people with learning disability, autism or both. We're also doing at the moment some national benchmarking, which CCG colleagues will have come across, I'm sure, both in terms of support service that's directly offered to children and young people with learning disability, autism, or both, but also through children and young people's mental health services. So in terms of the recent CAMS crisis mapping, we're asking local areas, are your crisis responses reasonably adjusted? Are they accessible? Are you providing specific support and services around children with learning disability or autism? So we're building up a fuller picture of that. One of the things that, I mean, we're aware of the impact of COVID. So although mental health services have continued through the COVID period, we're aware that children and young people with learning disabilities and autism aren't always able to access the technology in order to access services as well as their peers, and so that's something that we're looking at as well. There's the 24-hour crisis support line. Again, we're looking at how those are reasonably adjusted for learning disability and autism, and we're looking at how we understand how they're being used by children with learning disability and autism and their families. So there's lots going on in that area. And as Amanda was saying around SENDIAS not being the kind of panacea for this, that it is about how we think about linking in children and young people's mental health services, learning disability services, thinking about where the gaps might be around autism services, which we're becoming much more focused around with the refresh of the autism strategy, thinking about how parent carers play into co-production of services, thinking around how SENDIAS and other cross-organisation services play into that. And so that there is work going on in all of those areas at the moment, with the key focus around, particularly from, again, my perspective, around learning disability and autism as a key commitment in the long-term plan.
And one of the things that we've been doing is trying to help mental health support teams, so at that sort of lower threshold of response, make sure that they have an autism specialist. And some of the good practice that came out of the Children and Young People Accelerator sites, Phil, was around, well, maybe it wasn't actually one of the accelerator sites, but there was a site that had a local area that had upskilled both its learning disability CAMS service and its CAMS service, so that basically if a child with autism went to either, then they weren't turned away, but that they got a service. So I think, you know, there is lots of really good stuff that has been going on that's improved the response. We've got a question from Laura about identification and the need to improve community response. She said, Phil, you mentioned VCFS. Can you expand?
Sorry, can I expand in terms of identifying children and young people?
Laura, do you want to pop on and just sort of tell Phil what you need from him? Oh, maybe she's gone. I'll tell you what, we'll follow that up with Laura afterwards, and there's a few. So I did wonder actually when you said this, Phil, whether somebody might also say this. So Siobhan is slightly worried about you encouraging SENDIAS services to prompt CETRs because of the cost not being insignificant. Have you got any response for that one?
So I mean, I think when we wrote the guidance, we were really clear that CETRs should be available on request where that's appropriate, and again so it's not that. I think it's a difference, isn't it, between I think where a CETR, a community CETR, is appropriate, where we're looking at an admission that's likely, and where the additional scrutiny of a CETR is warranted. I guess from my perspective, I'm not too worried about where that request comes from. Notwithstanding that, clearly there's some thinking to be done locally around whether a CETR is the right response at that time, or whether there could be some other type of meeting or response to that issue that might avoid that CETR, solve the issue that's been raised, or aim to resolve the issue that's been raised, and then potentially avoid an admission at some point down the line. But I think if you've got a family in crisis, if you've got a child or young person in crisis, and that an admission is likely, then I would rather services flag that up with the risk of them maybe requesting a CETR inappropriately and requiring a different response than not flag it up.
Thanks, Phil. Daisy, did you have a comment on that point?
Just very quickly, that just completely agree with Phil, and we would say that was also about making sure we gave all services good training. They had good national and local training, and it's about the relationship with CCG and health professionals and their SLA. So you'd want all of that to be built in so that they were using them and using that avenue appropriately, and the relationships were all good enough, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Amanda, can I pop in? It's Siobhan. I just want to clarify what I was saying. I completely agree with what you said, Phil. Completely agree with what you've said, Daisy. I think it's just being really open about the fact that you may see a slight increase in the CETRs, and we have to factor those costs in. The costs will be offset against the prevention of admission in the long run. But I think just when we think about business case, we have to understand that even if there's an increased cost initially, and the support mechanisms that need to be in place to ensure that we can increase the numbers of CETRs, because what you don't want to end up is the bottleneck at that point. But absolutely, if we can use SENDIAS more effectively, and one of my questions a bit further on was, have we collected data, nationally around asking families or children if they've accessed SENDIAS services prior to admission? Because I think that would be a really, really good piece of information that we could pull that would help, help with some of the discussions around CCG funding for SENDIAS.
Thanks, Siobhan. So the point that you're really making is that in your business case and in your risk register, that's something that just needs to be flagged, that hopefully over time it will be offset, but you just need to be aware of it up front. Julie, you've been very patient.
Hi, no, thank you. No, just I hear what Phil's saying, I completely agree, but also just wanted to flag around my anxiety around having going immediately to a CETR. I oversee CETRs in Bedfordshire. We've had massive rises since COVID, which we do recognise as a good thing. I'm not saying that CETRs aren't a good thing, but also there's accountability prior to that, to having that multi-agency caseload management. And I think my slight anxiety is that we're going to be having a straight move to a CETR when we can have that very much early intervention work in a multi-agency level. And I guess that's my only anxiety around that.
I would absolutely agree with that. I would absolutely agree. I think that CETRs, I think I'm looking at it from a slightly different angle of where we are still seeing children and young people admitted without CETRs, and we want to strengthen our messaging around that and only see that by exception. So there should be something exceptional around the admission of a child or young person without a community CETR, and we're looking at ways that again we can strengthen and support that. But again, notwithstanding, I would absolutely agree. If there could be a multi-agency, cross-organisational meeting at some point prior to that, then I think that is something that we should look to encourage.
And just quickly on Joy's point about data flows and consent, we're doing some more work around sharing data. Obviously, there's been some great stuff happening during COVID because of the relaxation in the data sharing regulations in the Coronavirus Act, but actually we are working with the Southwest CSU and just re-looking at the whole thing around data sharing, and certainly the Information Governance Alliance is very clear that it's permissible to put the EHC number, sorry, the NHS number on the EHC plan. Then you can, at point of data sharing, you know, have a unique identifier and have all of the data around a particular young person associated with that NHS number. So anyway, watch this space for that, Joy. Oh, Phil, it says Andrew's asking whether a copy of the work done by Essex is available. Was that included in the Accelerator site report, Phil?
No, I don't think it was. I will try and follow it up, because it did make for really interesting reading, and again would be really supportive of some of these business cases. I think I will look into that.
And I think Daisy might be wanting to follow up on the consent issue. Or did you have a completely other issue?
Actually, Daisy? Completely different thing.
Okay, go for it.
Which was just a kind of a point about the support, not just from SENDIAS about when a child or young person might go into an ATU, but actually afterwards. That services who know and have a relationship with that young person or child and their families, actually about what's happened to that education, health and care plan, what happens when they come out, what's put straight back in, is that going to another provision? So there's all the stuff about before not getting to that point, but I think we also have to think about the afterwards. This is a service who can be there to support that and to make sure that they are getting their education provision, whatever other provision. So I think I just wanted to highlight that as well. Consent. You know, we have lots and lots of legal guidance about consent and about how we share data and when we don't. Confidential service cannot give details to anyone else unless child protection, but the relationships with the families often mean that actually not seen as, the information advice support service is not seen as so official. And actually, I think if in that kind of supportive relationship, then actually sharing of information that is helpful often happens. And I think Wakefield had a good example of how they do that in the chat box. That was all. I'll stop talking now.
That's a really good point. And if I could come in and echo that again, where local services such as SENDIAS can play that supportive role in terms of reducing or potentially reducing length of stay in hospital by supporting discharge planning, by supporting families through that discharge planning, and by making sure that local partners are joined up in their thinking around how to provide community support post-discharge, then absolutely that's an area that we would also like to encourage and explore.
Super. Now, Helen Shepherd, you had your hand up for the longest time. Did it just get tired and you put it down, or did somebody else?
I did before I forgot to put it down. It was just going back to the increase in community care education and treatment reviews. We had Calderdale is only a small area, and I chaired 6 in June, so on average 1 a month, 1 every 6 weeks. It was a significant rise. The only which is brilliant, because we got some really good outcomes, and it also identified that both from the independent panel and myself having feedback, although our Open Minds Partnership, formerly CAMS, is one team, the outcome for children and young people with a learning disability and or autism, and both, their outcomes from the CETR were better than the mental health outcomes, and there was a lot of frustration and negativity raised. So that's been something I've been able to take back to senior colleagues to express it is a single service. Why is it coming across as 2 separate services? And I'm all for parents requesting and people giving them information about let's have a CETR, but we've had to do a lot of unpicking because families have got the hopes up that this is the magical be-all, will solve all your problems, where other services have been involved for a long time, haven't been able to, resolve everything. but having to go back to the families, have an open discussion. They're not at risk of admission, you know, they're not at risk of being chucked out at home and losing a school placement, and that they're open to CAMS. And actually this should be a care programme approach. But I've been able, because I've obviously reassured the families and the parents who are very anxious, and they've been led down a line of this is going to be the only way, to then say, well, you don't meet the criteria. But it's about how we don't raise parents and families' expectations, but meanwhile making sure that if, you know, if a CETR isn't the avenue for their young person, what can we do instead? And it's about unpicking it a little earlier on with services. I mean, when things start to calm down, should I say, I'm going to do some work on CETRs with my local authority social care manager about some training for individuals across the services to get that clarity across. But it was just a little comment. Absolutely great to have parents requesting things, but it's important that they're requesting it for the right reasons, really. That was all I wanted to just quickly say.
So we just need to make sure that services have got that good training and know when it's appropriate. And as Daisy said, make sure that's part of the service level agreement. Phil, did you have a response for Helen? Or were you just unmuted because you're ever ready?
I was just going to say that I'd heard what Helen was saying, and I think there's something around. It comes back to a point that Daisy raised earlier around making sure that SENDIAS services do have the training around CETRs when they're appropriate, when they're not appropriate, what that looks like locally. And so again, it's part of that health commission, isn't it, around saying this is our expectation of SENDIAS in this context. And also just on a related note, to work with parent and carer forums in terms of helping them to understand when a community CETR might be the right response, and so that they can support their members in making an appropriate request. And as you say, not necessarily seeing it as the only route to open a conversation.
Thanks, Phil. So Helen Tannion's got a question, I think, for Daisy. Will there be a staged approach with clear guidance to CCGs and local authorities regarding must-dos as foundation level through joint commissioning mechanism, so submission of progress plans are monitored and strategic leads are clear on expectations and accountabilities?
Wow. My responsibility is to make sure that services know what they are doing, that we have some national level of training, and that I support local authorities and CCGs in ensuring that this stuff happens. So I will, encourage that to happen. I can't make it happen because sadly that seems to be a thing. But we will, we need to look very carefully at when we are joint commissioning, when we're supporting people in joint commissioning, about ever understanding what that includes. And this is obviously a piece of work that may not, I'm not sure if it is in the SLAs we've got, but that we may want to think about how that would be included in SLAs. And all of this is a moving thing. All of this is changing. None of this is kind of set in stone. This is what we've commissioned. This is it. This has to be a thing that develops. And I think from this, I will have a conversation maybe more of NHS England about more training. And we can look at how we support local areas to make sure that this is happening, and this is happening in an appropriate way. Because, I hear your fears about, well, we're going to get more CETRs or people are going to go, inappropriately. And in fairness, we've had that about lots of stuff. We have that about child protection. People worry about that about tribunals, and it doesn't happen in the main. And when it does, it's because that's what's needed to happen. And that's about making sure, as we've said, services are trained, and that's local training as well as national training, that's part of your commissioning. When you're commissioning services, part of that is training and support for them and making sure they are doing all of that correctly, and that they're part of your meetings and your boards and your discussions and that relationship, so everyone knows, as far as anyone can, what they're doing.
Thanks, Daisy. And Louise was just asking for a bit of a clarification around the position of the use of the NHS number on EHCPs. So this is a work in progress at the moment, Louise. So the Information Governance Alliance, and I'll as part of the stuff that we send round, I'll make sure that I send a copy of their briefing, is really clear that the government's mandate to use the NHS number as a unique identifier within health and care situations also extends to education settings for children where there might be a health interest, and so they talk about SEND as part of that. Now, because the previous legal advice that we received was that you should only put the the NHS number on the EHCP if you had consent, we are going to basically we're in the process of producing a briefing based on the Information Governance Alliance briefing, but with some added stuff, and then we will get that legally checked before we circulate it. So bear with us for now, Louise. More is coming. Right, so Catherine Burton's got a case study for you, Daisy. I think because we've only got 3 minutes left, I'm going to not pretend that I can read through the rest of the comments. Has anybody got a question that they haven't had answered, that they would like answered? Would they please raise their hands? Look at that, you've done a stonking job, Phil and Daisy, and you have answered everybody's questions. What we will do is we'll go through the chat, and if there's anything that we can follow up on that we haven't addressed in the session, then we'll do that. Is that all right with you, Phil, if we ask you for a written response for anything that we haven't managed to address? So in that case, I think it just remains for me to say Marie will send round, or somebody will send round both the slide sets and a link to the recording on our website, which you are absolutely free to share with all and sundry colleagues that you think should have attended who haven't, colleagues that wanted to attend and couldn't, and as I say, we'll follow up on the chat. Thank you very much to Daisy and to Phil, both for their presentations and for their responses to everybody's questions. And thanks to everybody for such an engaging session. I think I've found that absolutely fascinating. So and hopefully that will help Daisy and the SENDIAS services with their joint commissioning numbers somewhere down the line. So enjoy your lunch and have a good week, and see you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.